They say that some nights change you, even if you don't see it coming. That night, what began as a casual gathering with friends slowly became something far deeper, a test of boundaries that left me questioning everything I thought I knew about my marriage and about myself. Alaric, my husband of almost 3 decades, and I were used to these kinds of parties. Small, private get-togethers with friends we'd known for years. We had our routines, both at home and in our social lives. And these parties were always a comfort, a way to reconnect with familiar faces and laugh off the stress of the week. The night started off like any other. Laughter, music, glasses clinking in toasts to the weekend, and conversation filling the air. We gathered at the cozy house of our longtime friends, the Carricks, who had a gift for making guests feel at home. The fire crackled in the background, casting a warm glow over everyone as we settled into the usual chatter. Yet, as the hours ticked by, something felt different. The laughter grew louder, the teasing sharper, and there was an undercurrent of tension in the air I couldn't quite name. Alaric seemed unusually animated, whispering with his friends in the corner, casting glances around the room. As I watched him, a strange unease settled over me. His eyes met mine briefly, and for the first time in years, I couldn't read what was behind them. I didn't realize it then, but I was on the edge of a night that would reveal things I'd never anticipated. About Alaric, about our friends, and about desires that had been dormant for longer than I cared to admit. The evening unfolded with the easy pace of familiarity. Alaric and I greeted friends we'd known for years. Gerald and Teresa, who had been married just as long as us. Margaret and her husband, Amos, who'd only recently joined our circle. And of course Elias, one of Alaric's oldest friends, known for his wit and charm. Everyone seemed in high spirits, laughing as they recounted stories and caught up on gossip, adding to the comfortable atmosphere. Margaret had done a beautiful job decorating the house. Twinkling lights were strung along the mantel, and a spread of appetizers and drinks was laid out on the table. The rich scents of roasted nuts and warm mulled wine filling the room. The playlist was upbeat, a mix of classic rock and jazz, tunes that reminded us all of the younger days when weekends were for dancing till dawn. But even in that cozy atmosphere, something felt different. I noticed that conversations lingered a little longer, that certain glances between couples seemed almost conspiratorial. As the drinks flowed and the evening grew later, the teasing between friends took on an edge I hadn't noticed before, a touch flirtatious, with a boldness that was unusual in our circle. I chalked it up to the wine, to the relaxation that comes after a long week, and tried to brush it off. We'd all had our share of stressful months, and maybe we were all just letting off steam. Then, as I watched Alaric from across the room, I noticed he was huddled in conversation with Gerald and Amos, their heads close together, voices too low for me to hear. Alaric had always been close with them, the three of them often acting like schoolboys reliving their glory days. But tonight, their expressions were different, serious, yet filled with a strange kind of anticipation. When I caught Alaric's gaze, he gave me a smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. I felt a pang of uncertainty, but before I could dwell on it, Elias joined me, offering a glass of wine. He was Alaric's best friend, someone I had grown to trust over the years, and his presence was comforting. "Having fun?" he asked, his tone light, but his eyes studying me closely. I nodded, taking a sip. "Of course, it's always good to see everyone." He raised an eyebrow, a hint of amusement in his expression. "Is it, though? Tonight feels different, doesn't it?" I hesitated, searching his face for clues. "Yes, it does. I can't put my finger on it, but something's off." He nodded, his gaze shifting briefly toward Alaric and the others. "Sometimes, people like to shake things up, try something new." The way he said it made my pulse quicken, though I wasn't sure why. Before I could respond, he gave me a reassuring smile and drifted back to the group, leaving me with more questions than answers. I tried to rejoin the party, mingling with friends, laughing at jokes, and listening to familiar stories, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was building just below the surface. I caught snippets of conversations, phrases that hinted at secrets and hidden intentions, words that lingered in the air and left me feeling both curious and uneasy. Alaric returned to my side, his face flushed from the wine, his eyes bright with an intensity I hadn't seen in a long time. "Are you enjoying yourself?" he asked, his tone casual, but there was a flicker of something behind his gaze, a mixture of excitement and anticipation that sent a shiver down my spine. "Of course," I replied, forcing a smile. "But is everything all right?" He chuckled, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "Why wouldn't it be? We're just having a bit of fun, aren't we?" His answer was vague, and it only deepened my unease. I felt like I was missing something, like there was a piece of the puzzle that everyone else knew but me. I scanned the room, noting how the other couples were clustered together, their laughter a bit too loud, their expressions a bit too eager. It was as though they were all in on some unspoken plan, something I hadn't been prepared for. As the night wore on, my unease grew, fueled by the strange energy in the room. The laughter, the glances, the whispers. It all felt surreal, as if we were all actors in a play that had taken a turn I hadn't anticipated. I wanted to ask Alaric what was going on, to demand an explanation, but every time I opened my mouth, the words wouldn't come. Instead, I clung to my wine glass, hoping that whatever was happening would soon make sense. But the answers I was looking for would arrive sooner than I expected, in a way that would change everything. It was close to midnight when the atmosphere shifted. Gerald and Teresa, who were usually the first to call it a night, seemed to be lingering, their faces flushed and their laughter louder than usual. Gerald, usually the reserved type, was practically glowing with excitement as he huddled with Alaric and Amos, their voices low, but their expressions animated. Then, Alaric approached me, his expression a mixture of excitement and something I couldn't quite read. He took my hand, pulling me gently toward the corner of the room where Gerald and Teresa stood, their faces showing the same anticipation. "Loretta," Alaric said softly, his voice both soothing and intense, "we've been talking. And, well, we thought we'd try something different tonight." The phrase hung in the air and I felt my heart begin to race. "Different?" I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, his gaze steady on mine. "Yes, something new. Gerald and Teresa are open to it. And, well, so am I." I glanced around, my mind reeling, trying to make sense of what he was suggesting. In that moment, a quiet hush had fallen over the room, as though everyone was waiting for a decision to be made. A choice that would either keep the evening as it was, or take it in a new, uncharted direction. Alaric's hand tightened around mine, and I felt his pulse quicken, matching the rhythm of my own. There was no mistaking the suggestion in his gaze, the quiet thrill that sparked in his eyes as he looked at me. I felt my heart pounding as I tried to process what Alaric was suggesting. The idea of partner swapping wasn't something we'd ever even joked about, let alone discussed seriously. My cheeks grew hot as I realized that his proposal wasn't some passing thought. This had been planned, or at least discussed among the men. I glanced around, noting the subtle nods and brief glances exchanged between couples, confirming that everyone was in on it. Everyone but me. Alaric's gaze was steady, though there was a flicker of hesitation, as if he were testing my reaction before committing fully. I felt dizzy, my thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and questions that I couldn't sort through fast enough. The idea seemed both absurd and somehow magnetic, a temptation that was stirring emotions I hadn't realized I was capable of feeling. "Loretta," Alaric whispered, leaning closer, his voice low and reassuring. "This is entirely up to you. If it doesn't feel right, we'll walk away. But if there's a part of you that's curious, I want you to know that you have my full support, whatever you choose." The sincerity in his voice took me by surprise. I could see that he wasn't trying to pressure me. If anything, he was offering me the freedom to make my own choice. Yet, in his expression, there was something else, a look of anticipation, of eagerness, that made my heart race even faster. I glanced at Gerald and Teresa, who were standing nearby, watching us with a mixture of empathy and understanding. Teresa gave me a small, encouraging smile, as if she, too, had once felt the same apprehension and uncertainty. Her smile felt like an invitation, an assurance that she understood what I was going through. A quiet hush had fallen over the room, and I realized that the other couples were watching us, waiting to see what we would decide. It was as though the entire night hinged on this moment, on whether or not we would cross the invisible line that separated friendship from something far more intimate. For a long moment, I stared at Alaric, searching his face for any sign of doubt, of regret, but all I saw was anticipation. He was offering me the chance to explore something new, something we had never dared to consider before. And despite the fear and the uncertainty swirling inside me, I couldn't deny the flicker of curiosity that had been sparked by his proposal. "Only if you're sure," I whispered, barely able to meet his gaze. He nodded, his expression softening. "I am. But it's your decision, Loretta. I'll respect whatever you choose." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on me. The room seemed to close in around us, the faces of our friends blurring as I focused solely on Alaric, on the quiet promise in his eyes. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a thrill I hadn't felt in years, and before I could second-guess myself, I gave a small nod. The reaction was immediate. A murmur of approval rippled through the room, and Gerald and Teresa stepped forward, their expressions warm and welcoming. Alaric gave my hand a reassuring squeeze, and I felt a strange sense of liberation wash over me, a feeling of letting go, of embracing the unknown. But as I glanced around the room, I realized that this decision would have consequences I hadn't yet begun to understand. The first couple to take the plunge was Gerald and Teresa. With an ease that surprised me, they nodded to each other, exchanging a look of mutual understanding before approaching another couple. The transition was seamless, as though this were a natural progression, something they had been waiting to explore. Watching them, I felt a strange mix of emotions: curiosity, admiration, and a flicker of apprehension. I glanced at Alaric, searching for reassurance, and he offered me a gentle smile, his eyes filled with quiet confidence. I could see that he trusted my judgment, that he was giving me the freedom to decide how far I wanted to take this. His openness, his willingness to explore the unknown with me, was both comforting and exhilarating. The room seemed to take on a new energy as other couples began to follow suit. There was a sense of liberation in the air, a feeling of breaking free from the constraints of routine and expectation. I felt a thrill of anticipation, a sense of stepping into uncharted territory, even as a part of me remained hesitant, uncertain of what this night would ultimately mean for us. Alaric leaned in close, his voice barely audible above the quiet murmur of conversation. "If you want to stop, just say the word, we'll leave." But even as he spoke, I could see the excitement in his eyes, a glimmer of something I hadn't seen in years. It was as if the evening had rekindled a part of him that had been dormant, a part that I hadn't realized I missed. I felt a surge of affection for him, a renewed sense of connection that transcended the boundaries of our marriage. And in that moment, I knew that I wanted to continue, to see where this night would lead. Just as I was about to respond, Elias, Alaric's oldest friend, approached us. His gaze was steady, his expression warm and inviting. He had always been kind, a calming presence at every gathering, and tonight was no different. He extended a hand, offering me a choice, a path forward that felt both thrilling and forbidden. "Would you like to join me, Loretta?" he asked, his voice gentle. I hesitated, glancing at Alaric for reassurance. He gave me a small nod, his hand brushing mine in a gesture of support. I felt a surge of confidence, a sense of freedom that was both exhilarating and terrifying. Taking a deep breath, I reached for Elias's hand, allowing myself to be guided into this new experience, to embrace the unknown. Alaric's gaze remained on me, a silent promise of his support, his acceptance, and I felt a sense of unity that transcended words. As Elias led me to a quieter corner of the room, I felt my nerves settle, replaced by a calm sense of anticipation. I glanced back at Alaric, who was now engaged in conversation with another woman, his demeanor relaxed and open. Seeing him at ease, I felt my own fears begin to dissipate, replaced by a quiet confidence that this night would bring us closer, that it would deepen the bond we shared. Elias and I found a small alcove near the window, away from the others, where the soft glow of the candles cast a warm light over the room. We sat together, our hands resting on the table between us, and for a moment, we simply looked at each other, sharing a silent understanding that transcended words. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice soft, his gaze filled with empathy. I nodded, though my heart was still racing. "I think so. This is new for me." He smiled, his expression reassuring. "It's new for all of us, Loretta, but we're here together. No pressure, no expectations, just an opportunity to explore." His words were calming, a reminder that this night was about choice, about freedom. I felt a sense of relief, a release from the weight of expectation, and for the first time, I allowed myself to relax, to enjoy the moment for what it was. As we sat there, talking quietly, I found myself opening up to him, sharing thoughts and feelings I hadn't even admitted to myself. Elias listened patiently, his gaze never wavering, and I felt a connection between us that was both unexpected and comforting. It was as though he understood the complexities of my emotions, the mixture of excitement and apprehension that filled my mind. And then, without a word, he reached for my hand, his touch gentle, his expression filled with warmth. I felt a spark, a thrill that sent a shiver down my spine, and for the first time I allowed myself to embrace the sensation, to let go of the fears that had been holding me back. In that quiet moment, I realized that this night was about more than just curiosity or desire. It was about finding a part of myself that had been lost, a part that yearned for connection, for understanding. And as I looked into Elias's eyes, I felt a sense of liberation, a freedom that I hadn't known was possible. As the evening continued, Elias and I settled deeper into conversation, the noise of the party becoming a distant hum as we lingered in the small alcove. He shared stories from his life that I hadn't heard before, details of past travels and regrets, dreams he'd set aside to follow the path of responsibility. In his words, I heard echoes of my own life, reflections of choices that seemed right at the time, but had left me wondering what might have been. I hadn't realized how hungry I was for this kind of connection, a space to explore parts of myself I'd buried under the weight of the everyday. Our hands rested on the table between us, our fingers occasionally brushing, an innocent touch that sent a warmth through me I couldn't ignore. The candlelight softened the room, casting Elias's features in a gentle glow, and for a moment it felt as though we were the only two people in the world. He looked down, his voice softening. "You know, I've watched you and Alaric over the years. You two have always seemed so solid, like nothing could shake you." I smiled, feeling a mix of pride and sadness. "We've had our ups and downs just like everyone else. Sometimes I wonder if we've just learned to exist within our routines, if we're too comfortable, if that makes sense." He nodded, his gaze meeting mine. "It does. I think many of us are guilty of that. Life pulls us in so many directions that we forget to nurture the connections that matter most." A comfortable silence settled over us, and I felt a sense of peace in his words, a feeling that went beyond simple attraction. With Elias, I didn't feel pressured or judged. There was no expectation, no urgency. It was as if he understood the complexities of my thoughts and emotions, giving me the freedom to explore them without fear. He reached for my hand, his fingers grazing mine, and in that brief moment, I felt an undeniable spark, a current that surged between us, unexpected and powerful. I looked up, my heart pounding as our eyes met, and in that instant I saw the same longing reflected back at me. A desire for connection, for intimacy, that transcended the boundaries of friendship. But before I could react, before I could make sense of what I was feeling, he leaned in, his voice barely a whisper. "Loretta, I don't want to complicate things, but there's something here, isn't there?" I hesitated, my mind racing as I searched for the right words. "Yes, I think there is," I replied, my voice barely audible. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear, his touch gentle and tender. "We don't have to do anything you're uncomfortable with," he said softly. "This is your choice, Loretta." His words were comforting, a reminder that this night was about choice, about embracing the unknown. I felt a surge of courage, a willingness to let go of the fears and doubts that had been holding me back. With Elias, I felt safe, understood, as though I could finally let down the walls I'd built around myself. Without another word, he leaned in, his lips brushing mine in a soft, tentative kiss. It was gentle, unhurried, filled with a tenderness that took me by surprise. My heart raced, a mixture of excitement and guilt swirling inside me, but I couldn't bring myself to pull away. In that moment, I felt alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. A spark reignited within me that I hadn't realized was missing. The kiss deepened, his hand cupping my face as he drew me closer, and I allowed myself to get lost in the moment, to let go of the reservations that had been holding me back. It was a release, a liberation from the constraints of routine and expectation, a chance to reconnect with a part of myself that I'd long forgotten. But as the kiss ended, reality came rushing back, and I pulled away, my mind reeling with conflicting emotions. I glanced around, suddenly aware of the others in the room, the friends who had shared this night of revelations with us. I caught a glimpse of Alaric across the room, his expression unreadable as he watched me, and a pang of guilt surged through me. "I should go," I murmured, my voice shaky. Elias nodded, his gaze filled with understanding. "I understand. Just remember, Loretta, this night was about exploring something deeper. Don't be afraid of what you're feeling." I gave him a small, grateful smile, my heart heavy with a mixture of regret and longing. As I made my way back to Alaric, I felt the weight of the evening settle over me, a realization that this night would change things between us, whether we were ready for it or not. As I approached Alaric, I saw the questions in his eyes, a silent inquiry that I couldn't answer. Not yet. He gave me a gentle smile, reaching for my hand, his touch warm and familiar. Despite everything, I felt a rush of love for him, a reminder of the bond we had shared for so many years. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice soft. I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. "Yes, I think so." We walked toward the patio, stepping out into the cool night air. The quiet allowed me a moment to gather my thoughts, to process the emotions that had been stirred by the evening's events. Alaric stood beside me, his hand resting on my shoulder, his presence grounding me, reminding me of the life we had built together. For a long time we stood in silence, each lost in our own thoughts, the weight of the evening hanging heavily between us. I wanted to speak, to express the turmoil inside me, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I leaned against him, feeling the warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart, a comfort that I hadn't realized I needed. Finally, he spoke, his voice filled with a quiet resolve. "Loretta, tonight was unexpected, but I think it's made me realize something." I looked up at him, searching his face for clues, trying to decipher the meaning behind his words. He continued, his gaze steady. "I think we've been holding back, living within the boundaries we set for ourselves years ago, boundaries that maybe don't fit us anymore." This evening, as strange as it was, made me see how much I still want to be close to you, how much I value what we have. His words touched something deep within me, a truth I had been reluctant to acknowledge. We had become comfortable, perhaps too comfortable, settling into routines that kept us at a distance, hiding behind familiarity rather than facing the changes that had occurred in our relationship over the years. "I know," I replied softly, my voice thick with emotion. "I think I've felt that too. I guess I just didn't know how to say it." He smiled, his expression gentle and understanding. "Then maybe this is our chance. A chance to reconnect, to rediscover each other in a way we haven't allowed ourselves to before." His words filled me with a sense of hope, a realization that this night, as complicated as it was, might be the beginning of something new, a chance to deepen our connection and rebuild the intimacy that had faded over time. In that quiet moment, I felt a shift between us, a renewed sense of commitment and understanding. We didn't need to talk about every detail of the night. The unspoken bond between us was enough. What mattered was that we were both willing to move forward, to embrace the challenges that lay ahead, and to find a way back to each other. We spent the rest of the evening together, talking about memories, dreams, and the future. The intensity of the night faded, replaced by a quiet intimacy, a reminder of the love that had brought us together all those years ago. And as dawn approached, I felt a sense of peace, a belief that this night, as surreal as it had been, had brought us closer, opening the door to a new chapter in our lives. The days that followed felt surreal, a mixture of routine and change that left me feeling both grounded and unsettled. Alaric and I didn't talk about the specifics of the night, but the memory of it lingered in our interactions, an unspoken understanding that seemed to draw us closer in unexpected ways. There was a newfound openness between us, a willingness to share thoughts and emotions that we had kept hidden for years. We spent more time together, taking long walks in the evenings, reminiscing about the early days of our relationship, rekindling the spark that had once defined us. But despite the closeness, there was a part of me that couldn't forget the moment I had shared with Elias, the connection we had found in that quiet corner of the party. It was a reminder of the complexities of love, of the way our hearts can be pulled in different directions, even when we are committed to one person. Alaric sensed my struggle, offering me the space to process my emotions, to come to terms with the choices we had made. He was patient, understanding, allowing me the freedom to navigate my feelings without judgment or pressure. It was a gift, a reminder of the depth of his love, and I felt a renewed sense of gratitude for the man I had chosen to spend my life with. Over time, the memories of that night began to fade, replaced by a sense of peace and contentment. The boundaries we had once clung to had shifted, allowing us to explore new depths of connection and intimacy, to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of trust and understanding. As we continued our lives, the silence between us became less of a barrier and more of a space for reflection. Alaric and I knew that what had happened was not just a fleeting experience, but a moment of truth, an opportunity to confront the reality of our relationship and the choices we had made along the way. In the days that followed, Alaric and I both seemed to retreat inward, each of us navigating the aftermath in our own way. Though we didn't talk about the events of that night directly, they lingered unspoken, present in the air around us, like an invisible thread connecting us through the shared experience. Silence, in its own strange way, had become a kind of bridge, a quiet space that allowed us each to reflect without the pressure to explain or dissect every emotion. Our interactions took on a new quality, a kind of softness and consideration that hadn't been there before. We found ourselves lingering over morning coffee, sharing quiet moments in the evenings, as if rediscovering the rhythm of our relationship all over again. There was a sense of relief in not having to rush into explanations or conclusions. I felt as though we were unwinding the complex knot of our feelings slowly, giving ourselves time to consider what this experience really meant for us. One night, as we lay in bed, Alaric reached for my hand, entwining his fingers with mine. The gesture was simple, familiar, yet it carried a weight that spoke volumes. I could feel his steady pulse, a reminder of the life we had built together. The quiet foundation of trust and companionship that had sustained us through so many seasons of life. "Loretta," he whispered into the stillness, "do you regret it?" I hesitated, letting the question settle around us. Did I regret it? A part of me did. The part that clung to tradition, to the comfort of knowing exactly where the boundaries of our marriage lay. But another part, the part of me that had felt the spark with Elias, that had experienced the thrill of stepping into the unknown, couldn't bring itself to regret the experience entirely. "No," I answered softly, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't regret it. It was different, but maybe we needed that. Maybe it's brought us closer somehow." He nodded, and in that quiet darkness, I felt the depth of his understanding. Alaric had always been my partner, my confidant, and now I realized that he was also my ally in navigating the complexities of life and love. The experiences of that night had shown us both that love could expand and evolve, that it could contain both adventure and stability, both passion and peace. "I don't regret it either," he admitted, his voice steady. "If anything, it's made me realize how much I still want to be with you. How much I want to keep discovering who we are together." Tears welled up in my eyes, and I felt a surge of gratitude for this man who had chosen to walk beside me through the unpredictable terrain of life. The night had revealed parts of ourselves we hadn't known were still alive, and in doing so, it had rekindled a connection we hadn't fully realized we'd lost. We didn't need to analyze every detail. The silence between us was enough. It held the answers we were both searching for, a quiet affirmation that we were willing to embrace the future together, whatever it might hold. A week later, as we sat together in the backyard watching the sun dip below the horizon, Alaric turned to me with an expression of calm but focused resolve. "I think it's time we talked about what's next for us," he said, his tone gentle but firm. I met his gaze, feeling a mix of apprehension and relief. I knew that this conversation was inevitable, that we couldn't simply leave everything that had happened in the realm of unspoken understanding. We needed to address what the night had meant, to find a path forward that would allow us to integrate these new insights into our relationship. "What are you thinking?" I asked, my voice steady despite the butterflies in my stomach. He took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. "I think we need to be honest about what we each want, not just in our marriage, but in our lives. We've spent so many years building this life together, but maybe we've lost sight of some of the things we each value." That night, it showed me that there's more to explore, not just in terms of experiences, but in terms of who we are. I nodded, understanding the truth in his words. We had fallen into a comfortable rhythm, a routine that, while steady and dependable, had also dulled some of the vibrancy in our relationship. That night had been a jolt, a reminder that there was more to life than simply going through the motions. "I feel the same way," I replied, reaching for his hand. "It's made me realize that there are parts of myself I haven't allowed to flourish, parts that I've kept hidden or ignored. I want to find a way to bring those parts of myself into our relationship, to show you who I am now, not just who I was when we first met." He squeezed my hand, his eyes filled with understanding. "Then let's promise each other that we'll keep exploring, keep finding ways to grow together. I don't want us to ever lose sight of the spark that brought us together in the first place." In that moment, I felt a renewed sense of commitment. A promise that went beyond the traditional vows we had taken all those years ago. This was a commitment to growth, to discovery, to keeping our relationship alive and vibrant, no matter where life might lead us. I felt a sense of peace, knowing that we were both willing to do the work, to invest in each other, not just as partners, but as individuals with dreams, desires, and aspirations. The confession that night had been a moment of truth, a chance to lay bare the hidden aspects of our hearts and to find a way forward that honored both our individual journeys and our shared path. In the weeks that followed, Alaric and I made a conscious effort to nurture the connection we had rediscovered. We planned small outings, moments that allowed us to step away from our routines and experience life together in new ways. We went on hikes, exploring trails we hadn't visited in years, marveling at the beauty of nature and the peace it brought. We took up dancing again, attending a weekly swing dance class that left us laughing and breathless, a reminder of the joy and spontaneity that had once defined our relationship. We also began to carve out time for deeper conversations, setting aside an hour each week to talk openly about our feelings, our goals, and the dreams we still wanted to pursue. These conversations became a cherished ritual, a space where we could be vulnerable with each other without fear of judgment. I felt a renewed sense of partnership, a belief that we were not just two people sharing a life, but two souls committed to helping each other grow. There were moments of difficulty, of course, times when the memory of that night resurfaced, bringing with it a mix of nostalgia and lingering questions. But each time those feelings arose, we faced them together, using them as a reminder of the lessons we had learned and the path we were forging. We had created a new foundation, one that allowed us to embrace both stability and spontaneity, both comfort and adventure. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the stars, Alaric turned to me with a smile. "Loretta, I feel like we're living our second chapter. I never thought it was possible to fall in love with the same person twice." His words touched my heart, and I felt a surge of gratitude for the journey we had taken together. We had weathered the storms of life, faced the complexities of love and desire, and emerged stronger, more connected than ever. The night of the party had been a turning point, a catalyst for growth and transformation. But it was the work we had done afterward that had truly deepened our bond. In that quiet moment under the stars, I realized that love is not a single, unchanging feeling. It is a choice, a commitment to rediscover and reinvent ourselves alongside the person we have chosen to share our lives with. And as I looked into Alaric's eyes, I knew that we would continue to choose each other, to build a life filled with adventure, understanding, and the kind of love that grows deeper with each passing year. Months later, as I reflected on the journey we had taken, I felt a sense of peace and fulfillment I hadn't known was possible. The night of the party had been a spark, a moment of revelation that had forced us to confront the truth about ourselves and our relationship. But it was the path we had chosen afterward, the commitment to growth and understanding, that had truly transformed our lives. Alaric and I continued to explore life together, finding joy in both the quiet moments and the new experiences we shared. We had created a marriage that honored both our individuality and our partnership, a relationship that was built on trust, respect, and a shared desire to keep discovering who we were. Looking back, I realized that love is not about perfection or unchanging loyalty. It is about being brave enough to face the unknown, to embrace the complexities of life, and to find a way forward together. We had learned to balance the comfort of routine with the excitement of exploration, creating a love that was both strong and resilient. And as we stood hand in hand, watching the sunset on yet another beautiful day, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey we had taken. A journey that had led us to a place of true intimacy, a love that would carry us through the rest of our lives, with hearts open to whatever the future might hold. It wasn't what he said, it was how he said it. His breath, warm and deliberate against my ear, sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool breeze wafting through the open patio doors. "I dream about you, Delilah," Nathan whispered, his voice so soft it melted into the din of the party. I froze, gripping my champagne glass tighter as though it might keep me grounded. My stepson, my husband's son, had just spoken words I couldn't unhear, words that lit a spark in me I had no business feeling. He straightened, his expression as unreadable as ever, and walked away, leaving me standing alone near the edge of the room with my thoughts racing. The family dinner had been William's idea, an annual tradition meant to show off our perfectly blended family to friends and colleagues. But perfection was a lie, and tonight, Nathan had shattered the facade. From the moment he came back from college that summer, taller and sharper-edged than I remembered, he'd been a quiet disruption in the household. At 24, he exuded a kind of confidence that blurred the line between boy and man, and somewhere along the way, I'd stopped seeing him as just a stepson. I hated myself for it. I hated the way my pulse quickened when he entered a room, the way my thoughts strayed at the sound of his voice. But none of that compared to the guilt I felt now, standing there, trembling, after what he'd just said. This wasn't supposed to happen, and yet, when I finally dared to glance across the room, I found him watching me, his gaze steady and unflinching. It wasn't a look of regret, it was a challenge. From that moment on, there was no going back. William and I had been married for 15 years. Our relationship was built on a foundation of pragmatism rather than passion. I was his second wife, the younger woman who brought warmth and energy back into his life after his first wife's tragic death. He, in turn, offered me stability, a sprawling house on the edge of town, financial security, and the promise of a life without chaos. It worked for a time, but as the years wore on, I found myself growing restless. William was kind but distant, his attention consumed by his work. He preferred structure to spontaneity, business to intimacy. Our marriage was comfortable, but comfort has a way of dulling the senses. Nathan was 15 when I married William. He was polite but aloof, a boy still mourning his mother and understandably wary of me. I did my best to build a bridge between us, baking his favorite desserts, attending his soccer games, listening when he wanted to talk. But our bond remained tenuous, more polite than familial. When he left for college, I thought the distance would erode what little connection we had. But over the years, he called occasionally, usually to ask for advice or share a small victory. Each conversation felt like a step forward, and I took comfort in the idea that we were finally finding common ground. Then he came home that summer. The night of the party, Nathan arrived late. I heard his car pull into the driveway as I was finishing the final touches on a tray of hors d'oeuvres. "Nice of you to finally show up," William said, his tone dry but not unkind. Nathan smiled in response, shaking his father's hand before leaning in to kiss my cheek. His lips brushed my skin lightly, but the contact sent a jolt through me. I dismissed it as nerves, blaming the tension I always felt at these gatherings. But Nathan's presence was different now. He'd grown into himself, shedding the awkwardness of youth for something more magnetic. His dark hair was neatly styled, his suit tailored perfectly to his broad shoulders. He moved through the room with an ease that belied his age, his deep voice drawing attention wherever he went. I wasn't the only one who noticed. "Your stepson is quite the charmer," one of the guests remarked to me later that evening, her gaze lingering on him. "He must take after his father." I forced a smile, feeling a flicker of something I couldn't name. The moment that changed everything came just after dinner. William was in the study, entertaining a few colleagues with cigars and whiskey. Most of the other guests had migrated to the patio, leaving me alone in the dining room, gathering plates. Nathan appeared in the doorway, his hands tucked casually into his pockets. "Need any help?" he asked, his voice low. I shook my head, not trusting myself to speak. He stepped closer anyway, picking up a stack of plates from the table. As he set them on the counter, he turned to me, his expression unreadable. "You look beautiful tonight," he said, his tone matter-of-fact. I blinked, caught off guard. "Thank you." He leaned against the counter, watching me with an intensity that made my stomach tighten. "I mean it, Delilah. You always do." "Nathan," I began, my voice barely above a whisper. But before I could finish, he stepped closer, his hand brushing mine as he leaned in. "Do you know how hard it is to pretend you're just my stepmother?" His words hit me like a thunderclap, stealing the air from my lungs. "This isn't funny," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm not joking," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "I've tried to ignore it, but I can't anymore. I don't want to." I took a step back, my heart racing. "You can't say things like that." "Why not?" he asked, his tone steady. "Because it's wrong, or because you feel it too?" I opened my mouth to argue, but the words wouldn't come. Because he was right. Somewhere, buried beneath the layers of denial and self-restraint, I felt it too. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I avoided Nathan as best I could, busying myself with guests and tasks that didn't need doing. But I could feel his gaze on me, a constant reminder of what had passed between us. By the time the last guest left, I was exhausted. William had retired to bed hours earlier, leaving me alone in the quiet of the house. I was rinsing glasses in the sink when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to find Nathan standing in the doorway, his tie loosened and his jacket slung over his shoulder. "Shouldn't you be asleep?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "I couldn't," he said, stepping closer. "Nathan?" "Just listen to me," he interrupted, his voice soft but firm. "I know this isn't supposed to happen. I know it's messy and complicated and probably wrong. But I don't care anymore. I've spent years pretending, and I'm tired of pretending." I shook my head, tears pricking at my eyes. "You don't know what you're saying?" "Yes, I do," he said, closing the distance between us. "And I think you do too." He reached for my hand, his touch warm and grounding. For a moment, I let him hold it, my defenses crumbling under the weight of his honesty. But reality crashed down on me like a wave, and I pulled away, stepping back. "This can't happen," I said, my voice breaking. Nathan didn't argue, he simply nodded, his expression pained but resolute. "I'll wait," he said quietly. "As long as it takes." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving me alone in the kitchen with my thoughts, and the unmistakable knowledge that nothing would ever be the same. I spent the next few days avoiding him, retreating into the safe monotony of my daily routine. I told myself it was for the best, that distance would extinguish whatever dangerous spark had been lit between us. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the memory of his voice, his gaze, his touch. It didn't help that Nathan made no effort to hide his feelings. He was careful, of course, never crossing any lines in front of William or the household staff. But when we were alone, his presence was magnetic, pulling me in despite every ounce of resistance I could muster. It happened for the first time late one night. William was away on business, and the house was dark and still. I had been reading in the living room, the only light coming from the lamp beside me, when I heard footsteps on the stairs. "Couldn't sleep?" Nathan's voice broke the silence, and I looked up to find him standing in the doorway. He was wearing a t-shirt and sweatpants, his hair tousled from bed, but there was nothing casual about the way he looked at me. I forced a smile, closing my book. "Just finishing this chapter." He stepped into the room, his bare feet silent against the hardwood floor. "It's late." "I know," I said, my voice quieter now. Nathan moved to the couch, sitting down at the opposite end. "You've been avoiding me." The accusation in his tone made my chest tighten. "I haven't been avoiding you," I lied. "You have," he said, his gaze steady. "And I get it, I do, but it doesn't change anything." "Nathan, just tell me one thing," he interrupted. "Do you feel it, the way I do?" His words were a mirror, reflecting everything I had been trying to deny. I wanted to say no, to end this before it began. But the truth had a way of slipping through, even when I fought to contain it. "Yes," I whispered, the word barely audible. For a moment, neither of us moved. The air between us was electric, charged with the weight of everything unsaid. Then he reached for my hand, his touch warm and tentative, as though giving me one last chance to pull away. I didn't. The days that followed were a blur of stolen moments and whispered confessions. We were careful, always watching for prying eyes, but the secrecy only heightened the intensity of what we shared. There was a recklessness to it, a sense of inevitability that made each encounter feel like both a risk and a reward. We met in quiet corners of the house, in the shadows of the garden at dusk, in the dim light of the library after midnight. Every touch, every glance, every word between us felt like a rebellion against the roles we were supposed to play. But secrets are fragile things, and ours was no exception. It started with something small, a forgotten coffee mug left on the edge of Nathan's desk, the lipstick stain unmistakably mine. William noticed it one morning while making his rounds through the house, his gaze lingering on the cup for just a moment too long. "Did you borrow Delilah's mug?" he asked, his tone casual but pointed. Nathan shrugged, his expression unreadable. "She must have left it here by mistake." William said nothing more, but I could feel his suspicion growing, a shadow creeping into the corners of our carefully constructed lives. The first real crack came during a family dinner. William had invited Clara, his younger sister, to join us. Clara was sharp and perceptive, with a talent for unearthing truths people didn't want to share. "So Nathan," Clara began, her tone light but probing, "how does it feel being back home? Must be strange after all that time away." "It's an adjustment," Nathan replied smoothly. "Adjustment for everyone," Clara added, her gaze flickering to me. "You seem closer to Delilah than I remember." Nathan smiled, his composure unshaken. "She's easy to talk to." "Is that so?" Clara's tone was laced with something I couldn't quite place, and I felt my pulse quicken. After dinner, Clara cornered me in the hallway. "You've been distracted lately," she said, her voice low. "Everything okay?" "Of course," I replied, forcing a smile. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You know, William's been worried about you. He doesn't say it outright, but I can tell. Is there something you want to tell me, Delilah?" "There's nothing to tell," I said, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. Clara studied me for a moment longer before nodding. "If you say so." That night, I found Nathan in the garden, sitting on the stone bench beneath the oak tree. He looked up as I approached, his expression a mix of longing and defiance. "She's on to us," I said quietly, sitting beside him. "She doesn't have proof," Nathan replied. "She doesn't need proof, if she keeps digging." I trailed off, the weight of our situation settling over me. Nathan reached for my hand, his grip firm but reassuring. "We'll handle it. Together." I wanted to believe him, but doubt lingered at the edges of my mind, a reminder that the walls were closing in. Our recklessness reached its peak a week later. William was out for the evening, attending a charity gala, and the house was ours. We were in the study, the door locked behind us, when I heard the faint sound of footsteps in the hallway. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my heart racing. Nathan nodded, his expression tense. A moment later, the doorknob rattled, followed by a sharp knock. "Delilah?" It was Clara's voice, her tone laced with suspicion. My breath caught, panic flooding through me. "Stay quiet," Nathan whispered, his voice barely audible. But Clara didn't wait for an invitation. The lock clicked open, and the door swung inward. She stood there, her gaze flickering between us, and I knew in that moment that our secret was no longer safe. Clara's eyes darted between Nathan and me, the air thick with unspoken accusations. The shock on her face quickly hardened into something sharper. Realization. "What's going on in here?" she asked, her voice cold and deliberate. I scrambled for an answer, but my mind was a tangle of panic and excuses. "Nathan needed help with something," I stammered, stepping away from him. Clara's gaze didn't waver. "With the door locked?" Nathan crossed his arms, his composure returning faster than mine. "Privacy, Aunt Clara. I'm not a kid anymore." "That's obvious," she replied, her tone biting. I felt my pulse quicken as her eyes lingered on the subtle cues we hadn't hidden well enough. The faint blush on my cheeks, the way Nathan stood slightly too close to me. "I think we should all have a chat," Clara said, her smile tight and humorless. "Let's not make this uncomfortable." We followed her to the sitting room, where she poured herself a drink before sinking into one of the armchairs. She gestured for us to sit, but neither of us moved. "I'll get straight to the point," Clara began, swirling her glass. "I've always had a knack for reading people, and right now I'm reading something very peculiar between you two." "There's nothing peculiar," I said quickly, forcing a smile. She raised an eyebrow. "Don't insult me, Delilah. You know as well as I do that William deserves better than lies." Nathan stepped forward, his voice firm. "Clara, you're making something out of nothing." "Am I?" She shot back, setting her glass down. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like the two of you have a lot to hide." The room fell silent, the weight of her words pressing down on us. "What do you want?" I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Clara leaned back, a faint smile playing on her lips. "I want to protect my brother, and if that means exposing whatever this is, I will." Nathan and I left the room in silence, but the tension between us was palpable. Once we were back in the study, I turned to him, my voice shaking. "She's going to tell him," I said, pacing. "We're finished." "No, we're not," Nathan replied, his tone resolute. "She's already figured it out." Nathan grabbed my arm, stopping me in my tracks. "We still have time. We just need to think." "Think about what? How to stop her?" I snapped. He hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." I stared at him, the implications of his words sinking in. "You can't be serious." "She won't stop, Delilah. She's not like William. She's relentless." I pulled away, shaking my head. "We can't do this. It's too dangerous." "Then what do you suggest?" he asked, his voice low. "We let her ruin everything? Let her destroy us?" I didn't have an answer. The next morning, Clara was gone. William mentioned over breakfast that she'd left early, claiming she had urgent business to attend to. "She seemed off," he remarked, sipping his coffee. I forced a smile. "You know Clara. She's always dramatic." William nodded, distracted by his phone, but I couldn't shake the unease that settled over me. Clara hadn't made a scene or left a note, but her silence was louder than any confrontation. Nathan and I exchanged tense glances throughout the day, neither of us daring to speak openly. That evening, the first blow landed. William called me into his study, his tone uncharacteristically serious. When I stepped inside, he was sitting at his desk, a folder in front of him. "Close the door," he said. My stomach churned as I obeyed, the sound of the latch clicking into place echoing in my ears. "What's this about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. William opened the folder, revealing a series of photos. My breath caught as I recognized them immediately. Grainy but damning shots of Nathan and me in the garden, our faces close, our body language unmistakable. "I received these this afternoon," William said, his voice calm but ice-cold. No return address, no note, just the photos. I felt the blood drain from my face. "William, Don't," he interrupted sharply. "Don't insult me by lying." "I can explain," I began, but he slammed the folder shut, the sound making me flinch. "Explain what? That you've been sneaking around with my son? That you've been making a fool of me under my own roof?" Tears pricked at my eyes as I shook my head. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "What is it, Delilah? Because from where I'm sitting it looks exactly like what I think." I couldn't answer. Later that night, Nathan stormed into my room, his face a mask of fury. "He showed me the photos," he said, pacing. "He knows." "I know," I whispered, my voice trembling. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing. What could I say?" Nathan ran a hand through his hair, his frustration palpable. "We need to get out of here. Tonight." "Leave? And go where?" "Anywhere," he said, his tone desperate. "As long as we're together, it doesn't matter." I stared at him, the weight of the situation crushing me. "This isn't a fantasy, Nathan. This is real, and it's falling apart." "Not if we leave now," he insisted. "We can start over." Tears streamed down my face as I shook my head. I can't leave everything behind." "You can," he said, stepping closer. "You just have to choose me." The house was quiet, but it was the kind of silence that felt oppressive, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. I sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the packed suitcase on the floor. Nathan's words from the night before still echoed in my mind. "You just have to choose me." But how could I? How could I leave behind the life I'd built, the facade of normalcy I'd worked so hard to maintain? Yet the alternative was just as impossible. A soft knock at the door jolted me from my thoughts. I opened it to find Nathan standing there, his expression a mixture of determination and vulnerability. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated, my heart warring with my head. "I don't know if I can do this." "You can," he said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "We don't have a choice anymore. If we stay, he'll destroy us." "He's your father," I said, my voice breaking. Nathan's jaw tightened. He stopped being my father the moment he decided to use this against us. "He doesn't care about us, Delilah. He only cares about control." His words cut deep, because I knew they were true. William wasn't a man who forgave betrayal, and now that he had proof of ours, he wouldn't rest until we paid for it. Downstairs, I could hear movement, William's heavy footsteps pacing in his study. He hadn't spoken to me since our confrontation, but his presence in the house was a constant reminder of the storm brewing just out of sight. "We leave tonight," Nathan said, his tone resolute. "I'll take care of everything. You just need to trust me." I wanted to. More than anything, I wanted to believe that we could escape this nightmare and find some semblance of peace. But the weight of what we were doing, the lives we were about to shatter, felt unbearable. "What if it doesn't work?" I asked, my voice trembling. Nathan stepped closer, taking my hands in his. "It will. Because we'll make it work. Together." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, we made our move. Nathan had parked his car down the street to avoid suspicion, and we planned to slip out through the garden gate. I crept downstairs, my suitcase in hand, my heart pounding with every step. The house was eerily still, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. But as I reached the door, a voice stopped me in my tracks. "Going somewhere?" I turned to find William standing in the doorway to the study, his face shadowed, but his tone razor sharp. My breath caught, and for a moment, I couldn't move. "William, save it," he snapped, stepping into the light. "You really thought you could just walk away? After everything you've done?" Nathan appeared behind me then, his presence grounding me. "This isn't your choice to make," he said, his voice steady. William's gaze shifted to his son, a cruel smile tugging at his lips. "You really think she'll choose you over everything I've given her?" "She already has," Nathan replied, his words cutting through the tension like a knife. For a moment, the three of us stood frozen, the weight of our choices pressing down on us, and then, without another word, I stepped toward the door, Nathan at my side. William didn't stop us. But his silence was a promise. This wasn't over. We didn't stop driving until the city lights disappeared, swallowed by the dark expanse of the highway. The air in the car was heavy, filled with a silence that neither of us dared to break. Nathan's hands gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles pale under the faint glow of the dashboard. I sat beside him, my suitcase at my feet, my mind racing with everything we had left behind. The house. The lies. William. And Clara. Her words before she left echoed in my mind. "If you're hiding something, Delilah, you won't be able to keep it buried forever." I hadn't believed her then, but now it felt like she had known all along how this would end. We stopped at a small motel off the interstate, the kind of place where no one asks questions. Nathan handed me the key without a word, his expression unreadable. Inside the room, the reality of our situation hit me all at once. The walls were thin, the bed creaked when I sat on it, and the air smelled faintly of mildew. This wasn't freedom, it was exile. Nathan sat beside me, his shoulder brushing mine. For a long moment we just sat there, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on us. "Do you regret it?" he asked finally, his voice quiet. I looked at him, his face shadowed but open, waiting. "Regret what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Choosing me." His words cut through me, raw and unguarded. I thought about William's face when we walked out, the look of betrayal and fury that would haunt me for the rest of my life. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice trembling. "I don't know if I'll ever stop feeling guilty, but I also don't know if I could have lived with myself if I stayed." Nathan nodded, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I'm sorry," he said, and for the first time since this began, he sounded unsure. "For what?" "For dragging you into this. For ruining your life." I reached for his hand, lacing my fingers through his. "You didn't ruin my life, Nathan. You just made me see it for what it was." The next morning, the weight of what we'd done felt heavier. We turned on the TV in the small motel room to find the news already buzzing with the scandal. William's face filled the screen, stoic and composed, as he gave a carefully worded statement about betrayal and legal action. My stomach turned as the reporter shifted the focus to us, his unfaithful wife and wayward son. The picture they painted was one of disgrace, of shame, of people unworthy of sympathy. Nathan turned off the TV, his jaw clenched. "He's going to make this hell for us." "We'll survive," I said, though the words felt hollow. "Will we?" Nathan asked, his voice soft but uncertain. I didn't have an answer. Later, as we packed up to leave, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. I looked different, older maybe, or just more tired. But behind the weariness, there was something else. Defiance. For better or worse, this was my life now. And for the first time in years, it was mine to decide. Nathan opened the door, the sunlight spilling in around him. "You ready?" I nodded, stepping out into the unknown, leaving everything else behind.